Hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I am Prasanna and today I am going to discuss how API Manager can be integrated with LDAP. This is an open forum, so all the questions are welcome. You can ask questions either via the chat during the presentation or unmute at the end of and have a discussion with WSO2 API Manager team and the rest of the community. The recording of this session will be uploaded to YouTube community channel API Live. Okay, so let's start proceedings. So our topic starts as WSO2 API Manager integration with LDAP. So I'll walk through you with an example so that it is clear for everyone. Okay. So as an example, in a practical organizational hierarchy, let's take a practical organizational hierarchy where there are a large number of users. So on the organization, there are departments. Let's assume there are 3 departments. One department is IT team, the other one is marketing, and the other one is HR. And in the IT team, as we all know, there are, let's assume that we have front-end developer team and a back-end developer team. Likewise, there are a lot of users in this organization. So let's say these users are using WSO2 API Manager to use APIs, and these users need to access to the systems, let's say publisher or dev portal. So how can we do that? And these users are already in a user store in the organization. So what we can do is we can plug that user store to WSO2 API Manager. So those user store might be in 3 different ways. So mainly, let's move on to the next slide. So user stores can be mainly as LDAP. LDAP, I'll explain what is LDAP in my future slides. AD means an active directory, and a JDBC user store. LDAP means lightweight directory protocol, and active directory is a directory service that stores user information, mostly using Microsoft. And JDBC is an SQL based user store. Maybe, we can use MySQL, Oracle, or whatever SQL that you need. So in this community call, I'll be discussing on LDAP. So let's move on to the LDAP. Right. So this is the place where the users will be stored, and the users will be stored in a hierarchical manner because this, in order to search the users and add users very quickly. LDAP is very lightweight. So it allows to search very fast, and the performance of LDAP is really high. So when you are using an LDAP, let's move on to the second slide. I have an example diagram. As we talk about the example that we took previously. So let's see this example, right? We have the organization. Let's say the HR department. The organization is the DC example.com, and in that organization there are direct organization groups. Let's say the people who are in the HR group, and entries are the members in the HR group. And under that organization, there is a organization unit that I mentioned previously as IT department. And under that IT department, you will be having groups. Likewise, under the groups, you can have members. So this is a hierarchy of the LDAP user store, so that we can use these user stores to plug with API Manager and integrate and directly use and provide authorization and user accessibility for users. So how these user stores can be used with WSO2 API Manager. We'll move on to the next slide. In WSO2 API Manager, we have a concept called user stores. In user stores, we have a concept called primary user store and secondary user stores. Primary user store is mainly used for the members in the organization who manage the system and who are the core users in the organization. And likewise, the secondary user stores are used to plug any department or any organization subsidiary that can be plugged in. So let's talk about some bit about the secondary user stores. Let's take a different example. Let's say you have a company that operates in multi-regional region in the world. So you can those companies were situated in separate regions, have separate users, right? So they will be they can be plugged in as separate secondary user stores to our API Manager product. So let's talk about some of the advantages that you get when you use these user stores. Let's come to a task like maintenance. So you can disable these user stores. I mean, at a time where the time zone is different from each other and time zone that the traffic is low, and do the maintenance on that task, while others does not get that impact because we are disabling only one user store. Likewise, there are a lot of advantages when you use these kind of user stores. So we can add many secondary user stores to our API Manager product, and we can only have one primary user store. So well, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, primary user store is the main user store that is shared among all the tenants. So what is tenant? Tenant is an isolated entity, so that in an organization you can isolate whatever the criteria you like. But as an example, you can isolate it as for departments, as for business units. Likewise, you can separate the organization like that. On for the let's say you organize, you have a business that operates with multiple sections, and one section has a lot of subsidiaries, right? So you can segregate the business and with with a section called tenants, and per tenant also you can add secondary user stores for regions. So per that, the tenant concept is very important, since when you take a tenant, all the details in the tenant is isolated from others. So only one user should be configured as a primary primary use in the primary user store. Mainly we use as the admin user in the primary user store. I mean, in API Manager default it's shipped in the Nest2 database, or so you can change it to an LDAP. But as a best practice, we use the admin user as the in the primary user store, because whenever you need a task, the user store is up and running with you as because the primary user store. As I mentioned earlier, instead of using the embedded database, you can set up a separate repository and configure it as a primary user store. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. Secondary user store. As I mentioned earlier, you can use many secondary user stores, and those are easily pluggable. So what I can show you how we can plug that in the demo that we are doing in future. So let's move on. So now I mentioned about the user stores, how the user stores can be plugged into WSO2 API Manager. And now we can move on to the ways you can proceed with the user stores. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so these are the user stores that can be plugged into WSO2 API Manager. There are two main types of user stores. One is read-only LDAP user store. The other one is a read-write LDAP user store. So what is the difference between read-only user store and read-write user store, and what is the practical usage of this read-only user store and read-write user store. Let's say you have an organization that the user details should not be edited, right? But you need to give access to your system for that organization, right? So the users are predefined. You need only the read access for these users. So in that case, you can use a read-only LDAP user store. Read-only LDAP user store. So let's talk about a read-write LDAP user store. In a read-write LDAP user store, you can add users to that read-write LDAP user store as well. Likewise, you can read information from the user store. So these user stores can be the internal user store, the primary user stores, or the secondary user stores. Both of the primary user store should be a read-write LDAP user store, but for the secondary user stores, of course, it should be a read. It can be a read-only user store and a read or a read-like LDAP user store. So let's move on to the read-only LDAP user store. Some of the important points that we need to follow up when we are integrating read-only user store to the WSO2 API Manager. As I mentioned earlier, read-only user store does not allow us to create user groups or users. So one of the main important thing that you need to follow is when you are integrating it, the admin user should be in the primary user store. That's one of the main factors that we need to consider. So when you are using a read-only user store, the admin user and the admin role should be in that user store, right? And let's assume that the admin user is admin SOA, as I mentioned in the slide, right? So how this can be plugged into WSO2 API Manager, right? Let's move on to the configuration. The configuration part, the most important configuration part, right? So as just to briefly describe you about the 3.2.0 configurations, API Manager latest version configuration, all the configurations can be added in a single file that is located at API Manager product home repository conf deployment.toml. In that deployment.toml file, you can specify the super admin element. Under the super admin element, the username should be the username that you have taken from the read-only user store, and the admin role is admin. And there's another parameter that mentions that tells the WSO2 API Manager, right, this is a read-only user store. So you cannot create an admin account there. So you have to add this create admin account to false in API Manager side and start the server. So I'll show you by management consoles how we can plug these user stores and in the demo section, right? Okay, so let's move on to the second slide, the other slide. Okay, the other part is the read-write LDAP user store. Here, of course, also the main part that we need to focus on is the admin user part. So here, of course, we can either use the configure a user who is in the existing system, or we can either create a system for for example, if you are going to this approach as creating an admin user, right? uh, in this slide it should be true. I have accidentally mentioned false, so sorry about that. So when I'm sharing this slide deck, I'll make sure that it's true. So what you have to do is the username that you are going to create in the read-write LDAP user store is the admin, and the admin role is admin, and the create admin account, the parameter should be true. I'm sorry, it's false in the slide again, so I'll change it in when I'm sharing the slide deck. And either you can use the configuration as it was in the read-only LDAP user store and use an LDAP user in the existing system, right? So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so one of the main key points that I came across while preparing to this communicative call was how we can add high availability LDAP for WSO2 API Manager. So let's assume there are two LDAP servers uh, which is exposed, and those the users will are common in those LDAP servers. So how can we integrate those LDAP servers to WSO2 API Manager, right? So that task is really simple. In as I mentioned in the deployment.toml where the configs will be stored, right? What you have to do is you have to create a you have to create a space separated connection URLs for both the URLs in both the LDAP servers as mentioned in the slide, right? And the type of the user store should be read write LDAP unique ID user store, right? You can read more about this in the document link that I have put on the bottom of this slide. So mainly the advantage we have is, I'll show you in the demo in future. If one server is down, you can always authenticate from the other server and get it done. So what in API Manager, what it does is it reads the connectivity is active for this server, or else if it's not, you go to the other server and do the authentication of the user. Likewise, vice versa happening for the other part as well. Right, so this is one of the important point that I came across that I actually need to show you all in the demo, right? So let's move on to the other part. What I thought was one of the important attributes, I mean, that I need to show up you and discuss in this community call when you're plugging in external LDAP user store. Configure an LDAP user store, either external or internal, right? So what are the main part is the connection URL, right? You can either use LDAP or LDAP-S. So most of the LDAP servers are running on 10389 port, and you can use the host colon the port address as the connection URL. So the connection name comes with how you identify with how you identify a user. So user group will be system and user will be UID. The UID is the search space, right? So uh, the connection password, as you all know, the password that you need to connect to the LDAP server, and the search base. Search base is the place where you need to search these users, and that is the organization unit you put. And the search attribute is the attribute that you identify users uniquely. So in this case, we are doing is we are using the UID as the unique attribute that users to identify the users uniquely. So this is the username search filter. Username search filter is also the person, and this is how the format looks like in the country. And read groups. This also one of the important parameters that I came across. So let's say in the LDAP user store or LDAP user store that you are using, there are groups that are defined. So for the API manager to read the groups, you need to put this as put the parameter as true to read it. And as I mentioned in the username search base, there are group search base, group search filters as well, and group search name. And membership attribute. Membership attribute is the tree node actually. What is the tree? I mean, that this is mapping for a person that is member as mentioned here, right? So that's about one of the important parameters that I came across. So let's go to the slides of the organization hierarchy and just speak about the how this search based CN get created. So let me go to the slide of the diagram that I had previously. Yes, okay. So when you take this diagram, so if you are going to search this member, it will be DC example com and OU groups and CNIT name member. So this is coming in a hierarchical manner, right? So the most important thing, how does this search get, search is efficient, right? So when you have this hierarchy, when you go to these branches of the LDAP, it mitigates the all other branches and it looks at the branch that you are searching. Likewise, you can in the LDAP search happens, it removes most of the data and narrow down the amount of data that you can search the thing that you want. Okay, so let's move on to the slide that we were discussing previously. Okay, so the one of the other part is uh, I thought of discussing this as well. The Active Directory user store. So what is Active Directory? Right, Active Directory is a directory service database. This is the place where you store user information. Most of the organizations uses Active Directory, so that's why I put it this slide into this communication, this com call. So we also can plug this to WSO2 API Manager. So we have an implementation class for that. So the class that we are using is Active Directory User Store Manager. So when you add like this in configs to the repository count deployment.toml, you will be configured a user store manager, and there are other parts that you need to put to the conf as well, but you can go to the link below and put add those configurations to the deployment.toml. So but the main things that we need to discuss are put on the slide. So main part that is differentiating is the class, the implementation of the user store. So to plug in an Active Directory, the Active Directory user store manager is the class that we need to use, right? So let's move on to the demo. Okay. Okay, so let me stop sharing this and share the whole window. Okay. Stop sharing. Okay, so for the demo purpose, first of all, I'll show you how you can integrate an external LDAP users to an LDAP user stores to WSO2 API Manager, right? Initially, when you take the WSO2 API Manager deployment.toml, you can configure the user store in deployment.toml. Let me go to the deployment.toml file. Okay, yeah. In the place, the user store, in this place where you need to specify the LDAP users, the LDAP user stores. For this, of course, I am using the H2 database for the primary user store. And let's move on and see how we can plug those using the UI, right? So I have two LDAP user stores, user stores, LDAP 1 and LDAP 2, right, running on the system. So what I'll do is I'll go to WSO2 API Manager Management Console. and I'll be logging in as admin as a super tenant. So what I'll do is I'll add a secondary user store. Now the LDAP user store that I have added previously are disabled, and when you go to the users, you don't have the users there, only the admin users there. So what I'll do is I'm going to add an LDAP user store, right? So I'm going to add a read write LDAP user store. So I have one LDAP user store running in 10389 port and the other one running in 10390 port, right? So let's assume, let's add the first one first, right? So UID is admin, OU is system, and my password is admin. Okay, we have to specify the domain name. So let's say WSO2 org dot 3.2. Okay. Let me see if I missed anything. Yeah, now the LDAP user store is configured and it's enabled. So when you go to the user list, you don't see any users. So we can create users and see how whether it get created in the user store. What I'm doing is I'm going to add a user. So I'm going to add a user to the secondary user store as me. Yes, sometimes something has gone wrong when I'm configuring the user store. Let's see how what was system. Let's see, because I configured it previously as well. Let's see what it is. All right, I have used the port. That's funny. So my LDAP user store is running in 390 port. Sorry about that. So I changed it to the 390 port. And now what I'll do is I'll search the users, see the users. Okay, so I have a username John as well, and I have an admin at that user store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another user store user as me. Right, so I'm going to add creator and publisher all to this. That's Smith user, right? So the Smith user is added. So now I'm going to see whether this since I've connected to the I'm going to see whether this user is in the user store. So I added the user store one. So let's reload it. Under the WSO2 organization, under the group, yeah, the Smith is there, and I added 123 and the password also there as plain text. By default, it's using the plain text password. So when I go to the publisher, I will be able to log into publisher. Then this is authenticated through the LDAP, right? So now what I'll do is, I have, as I mentioned, I have two LDAP servers, right? Let's go to, let me show you the users that are in the LDAP. The user John is there in the second user store, for the first user store. And in the second user store, also user John exists, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug both the user stores as high availability user stores uh, to the API manager. So this is the first scenario that I mentioned. API manager is connecting through LDAP server, one LDAP server, and LDAP server has users, and that's what the scenario one that I demoed you, right? And this is the second scenario that I am going to demo you. All the users were shared among those two LDAP user stores. As I showed, user John is shared with LDAP user store 1, LDAP user store 2. And API manager has connected to this LDAP user store 1 and then LDAP user store 2, right? So how can you, so what I'll do is I'll add another user. I'll disable the existing user store. So when you go to the user list, you will be seeing these users, right? So when once I go to the user list and once I disable it, it takes me seconds to disable the user store. And when you list down the users in that user store are not listed under the users. So what I'll do is I'm going to add another user store, uh, and my users, my LDAP users stores are running in 10390 part and 10391 part, 91 port, and the UID is same as admin and system, and the password is admin, right? Okay. Three. Okay, let's wait. Okay, the user is added. So now when you list down the users, the user John and Smith both are there. Smith is coming from user store 1 and John is coming from user store 1 and 2 both, right? So what I'll do is I'm going to log in. So I have WSO2 IS servers running as two LDAP user stores. So what I'll do is I'll shut down one IS server, and this is my IS server 1. What I'll do is I'll shut down one IS server. So only one IS server is running. Now I'll try to log in as John to the system. The other IS server is running or not. John, let's see. Yes, John is there. The roles that I have to assign the role. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah. So now this John is authenticated through the other LDAP user, other LDAP server which is running on my laptop. So if I do vice versa, the user will be authenticated from the other LDAP server as well, right? So how these user stores will be stored, I mean, in API manager. So let's in for the super tenant, it's stored in the database. So let's see how it goes, how it will be stored for a tenanted user, so that I can show that to you as well. So I have an ABC user, abc.com user here. So abc.com, 1, 2, 3, sign. So what I'm going to do is I am going to add a new user store. I have one already added. So I'll do an edit and show you guys. This also added as the same user store that I used to the demo. So this user store is connected to this tenant. So in the presentation, of course, I mentioned these tenants, these user stores are isolated among the tenants. So if you create another tenant, this user store is not connected to that tenant, right? So since this is connected to this tenant, these two users are displayed for this tenant as well. And if it's not shared in the for the other tenant, if it's not connected to the other tenant, this will not be shown for other tenants. So in the file system, of course, under the WSO2 API Manager product, there's a location called repository tenants. And repository tenants, under repository tenants, there's a directory called user stores. And in that directory, this user store configuration is saved, right? This is what the configuration that I added, right? This is the high availability LDAP user store that is that is being used. And those configurations are stored in the file system under tenant directory for separate tenants. Right, so it concludes my community call about LDAP user store. So all are welcome for the questions and for the open discussion with the community. Hello. Sorry, I couldn't hear anyone. Did someone ask the question? Okay, so while we get questions, so this session is being recorded. So anyone would be can access this through the YouTube URLs, and all are welcome to suggest any new topics, agendas for our next community call as well. So we are hoping to have our next community call in January. And for the materials that you would like to access, for further analysis of the data that, the things that I showed in the community call, the links are already in the presentation, or else you can ask in our Slack channel and discuss the topics that you you want to discuss. Okay, so since no one has questions, so are we good? Hope we are good to end this community call. So we'll wait for another 30 seconds and see whether we can get question. If anyone is waiting for ask questions, or else, if you missed in this com call question and answer session, you will be also welcome to get your questions through our Slack channel. So you'll be all welcome to ask questions as well. Okay, so since we do not have any questions, we will be ending this community call. This community call is recorded in YouTube, and the links will be shared with you all. And we'll be again, I'm mentioning that we're having our next community call in January. So all are welcome to join to that community call as well. So for the moment, I am Prasanna from WSO2 API Manager team. Thanks all for joining for the community call. So I'll be stop sharing